imagine starting a company, not in a billion-dollar office, not with investors lining up to fund your dream, but inside a small garage? No guarantee of success. No roadmap. Just two young men, an idea, and the belief that computers could become part of everyday life. At the time, most people didn't even own a computer. They were massive machines, expensive, and built for governments, universities, and large corporations. The idea that every family could one day have a computer at home sounded unrealistic, maybe even impossible. But history has a strange way of rewarding people who refuse to accept what's considered impossible. That tiny garage would eventually give birth to one of the most valuable companies the world has ever seen. A company whose products are used by billions of people. A brand recognized in almost every country. A business that transformed not just technology, but music, phones, movies, and the way we communicate. This is the story of Apple Incorporated. A story of vision, failure, comeback, and relentless innovation. Welcome to Empires. Let's begin. The story begins in the mid-1970s. Long before smartphones. Long before social media. Long before the internet connected billions of people. In California, two young men shared a fascination with electronics. But they couldn't have been more different. One was a quiet engineering genius. He loved solving technical problems. He could design electronic circuits that amazed everyone around him. His name was Steve Wozniak. The other wasn't the strongest engineer, but he possessed something equally powerful. Vision. He understood design. He understood people. And perhaps most importantly, he understood how to make technology feel exciting. His name was Steve Jobs. Together, they formed one of the greatest partnerships in business history. Wozniak built incredible technology. Jobs imagined how the world could use it. Neither was enough on his own. Together, they created something extraordinary. In 1976, the two friends officially founded Apple. Money was scarce. Resources were limited. Every dollar mattered. To raise funds, Steve Jobs sold his van. Steve Wozniak sold his priced programmable calculator. It wasn't enough to make them rich, but it was enough to begin. Their first product wasn't glamorous. It wasn't even a complete computer by today's standards. The Apple I was essentially a hand-assembled circuit board that hobbyists could customize themselves. Still, it was something different. Something personal. Around that time, a local computer store placed an order for dozens of units. It was a huge opportunity. But there was one problem. Apple didn't have enough money to build them. Most people would have walked away. Jobs did the opposite. He convinced suppliers to provide parts on credit. He promised they would be paid after the computers were delivered. It was risky. Extremely risky. But it worked. Apple fulfilled the order. The suppliers were paid. And suddenly, the impossible started to feel possible. Sometimes, the biggest difference between success and failure is the willingness to take a calculated risk. The Apple I attracted attention. But it wasn't the product that changed history. That came 1 year later. In 1977, Apple introduced the Apple II. Unlike many computers of its time, it was designed for ordinary people. It featured a plastic case, color graphics, and a design that felt approachable rather than intimidating. For the first time, many families could imagine having a computer at home. Schools began using it. Businesses discovered new possibilities. Developers started creating software for it. Demand grew rapidly. Apple wasn't just selling a computer. It was helping create an entirely new industry. Revenue climbed. The company expanded. Employees joined. Investors noticed. Within just a few years, Apple had transformed from a tiny garage startup into one of the fastest growing technology companies in America. It was an extraordinary rise. But with rapid success, came enormous pressure. As Apple grew, so did expectations. The company was no longer a small startup experimenting with ideas. It was becoming a major corporation. New executives arrived. Investors demanded faster growth. Competition intensified. And inside Apple, different visions for the future began to collide. Steve Jobs believed Apple should build products that were beautifully designed, simple to use, and unlike anything else on the market. Others focused more heavily on operational efficiency and scaling the business. Neither perspective was entirely wrong. But balancing bold innovation with the realities of running a large company proved difficult. As Apple became larger, the challenges became larger too. The next few years would test the company in ways no one expected. In 1984, Apple unveiled a product that would become one of the most influential computers in history, the Macintosh. Its launch was unforgettable. Apple introduced it with one of the most iconic television commercials ever created, aired during the Super Bowl XVIII. The message was bold. Apple wasn't just releasing another computer. It wanted to challenge the way people thought about technology. The Macintosh introduced many people to a graphical user interface and a mouse, features that made computers easier to use than command-line systems that were common at the time. It inspired the industry. It influenced future products. And it reinforced Apple's identity as a company willing to think differently. But despite its innovation, internal tensions inside Apple continued to grow. And soon, those tensions would lead to one of the most shocking moments in business history. Apple had become one of the fastest rising companies in the world. Its products were changing technology. Its founders had become famous. From the outside, everything looked perfect. But behind closed doors, a power struggle was unfolding. One that would end with the company's own visionary leader being forced out of the business he helped create. In the next chapter, we'll uncover how Steve Jobs left Apple, why the company began to lose its direction, and how one of the greatest comebacks in corporate history brought Apple back from the brink of collapse. By the mid-1980s, Apple was no longer a small startup. It had thousands of employees, millions of customers, and enormous expectations. But inside the company, things were falling apart. Steve Jobs was known for his relentless pursuit of perfection. He pushed teams to achieve what often seemed impossible. Many admired his passion. Others found his management style incredibly demanding. As Apple grew, conflicts between Jobs and the company's leadership became increasingly difficult to resolve. In 1985, those disagreements reached a breaking point. After a struggle over the company's direction, Jobs left Apple, the very company he had co-founded. It was one of the most dramatic moments in business history. Imagine creating something from nothing, watching it grow into a global company, and then finding yourself on the outside. For many people, that would have been the end. For Steve Jobs, it became the beginning of a completely new chapter. After leaving Apple, Steve Jobs could have retired. He had money. He had fame. He had already changed the technology industry. But he wasn't finished. Instead, he started again. He founded Next, a company focused on building powerful computers for education and business. Commercially, Next never became a massive success. But something far more important happened. The company developed advanced software that would later play a crucial role in Apple's future. Around the same time, Jobs made another decision that many people underestimated. He purchased a small computer graphics division from Lucasfilm. Most people thought it was a risky investment. Few imagined what it would become. That small division eventually became Pixar. Years later, Pixar released Toy Story, the world's first fully computer-animated feature film. It became a global success. Jobs had proven something remarkable. Even after one of the biggest setbacks of his career, he could still build something extraordinary. Sometimes, failure isn't the opposite of success. Sometimes, it's preparation for something even greater. While Steve Jobs was building new companies, Apple was facing growing challenges. The company released multiple products. Some performed well. Others confused customers. The product lineup became increasingly complicated. Competition intensified, especially from personal computers running Microsoft Windows. Without a clear vision, Apple struggled to maintain the momentum it once had. Sales slowed. Profits declined. The company's future became uncertain. There were even serious discussions about whether Apple could survive. It was hard to believe. The company that had once inspired the technology industry was now fighting simply to stay relevant. Many analysts believed Apple's best days were behind it. Few expected what would happen next. In 1996, Apple made a decision that would change its history forever. The company acquired Next. The deal wasn't just about technology. It also brought Steve Jobs back to Apple. At first, he returned as an advisor. Then, as interim CEO. Many people saw it as a desperate move. Jobs saw it as an opportunity. The Apple he returned to was very different from the one he had left. Too many products. Too little focus. Declining confidence. Jobs believed Apple didn't need to do more. It needed to do less, but do it exceptionally well. One of his first decisions was surprisingly simple. He dramatically reduced the number of products Apple was developing. Some projects were cancelled. Others were delayed. Resources were concentrated on a small number of products that truly mattered. It was a risky strategy, but it reflected one of Jobs' most important beliefs. Focus isn't about saying yes. It's about having the discipline to say no. As Apple prepared for its comeback, it launched one of the most memorable marketing campaigns in history. Think Different. The campaign didn't focus on processors, memory, or technical specifications. Instead, it celebrated people who challenged convention. Artists, scientists, inventors, visionaries. The message was clear. Apple wasn't simply selling computers. It was selling creativity, innovation, and the courage to see the world differently. That campaign helped redefine Apple's identity. Customers no longer saw Apple as just another technology company. They saw it as a brand with a purpose. Great companies don't just build products. They build meaning. And meaning creates loyalty. Then, in 1998, Apple introduced the iMac G3. Unlike the beige computers dominating the market, the iMac featured a bold, colorful, all-in-one design. It looked different. It felt different. And people noticed. Customers loved its simplicity. Retail stores struggled to keep it in stock. The iMac became a commercial success and helped restore confidence in Apple. For the first time in years, it felt like Apple was truly back. But Steve Jobs wasn't finished. He wasn't trying to save Apple. He wanted to reinvent it. And the products that would follow would change not only the company, but the entire world. Apple had survived its darkest years. Steve Jobs had returned. The company had rediscovered its focus. And customers were beginning to believe again. But the greatest transformation was still ahead. In the next chapter, we'll explore how the iPod, the iPhone, and the App Store turned Apple from a successful computer company into one of the most valuable businesses in history. By the early 2000s, Apple had recovered. The company was profitable again. Customers were excited. But Steve Jobs wasn't interested in simply making better computers. He believed Apple's future extended far beyond the desktop. Around that time, the music industry was in chaos. People were downloading songs from the internet. Portable music players existed, but most were difficult to use. They had confusing software, limited storage, and poor design. Steve Jobs saw an opportunity, not just to build another music player, but to completely reinvent the experience. In 2001, Apple introduced the iPod. Its message was incredibly simple. 1,000 songs in your pocket. That single sentence explained everything customers needed to know. No technical jargon. No complicated specifications. Just one clear benefit. The iPod wasn't the first MP3 player, but it became one of the most influential. Because Apple understood something many companies ignored. People don't buy technology. They buy simplicity. And then, Apple made another brilliant move. It launched the iTunes Store. Instead of forcing people to buy an entire album, customers could legally purchase individual songs. It was convenient, affordable, and perfectly connected with the iPod. Apple wasn't just selling a device. It was creating an ecosystem. And that strategy would become one of the company's greatest strengths. Then came a year that would permanently change the technology industry. At a conference in California, Steve Jobs walked onto the stage. The audience expected Apple to announce a new phone. What they didn't expect was a product that would redefine what a phone could be. Jobs smiled and said something unforgettable. Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone. Moments later, he revealed the iPhone. At first glance, it looked simple. One screen, almost no physical buttons. A touchscreen interface unlike anything most people had used before. Many competitors dismissed it. Some believed people would never want a phone without a physical keyboard. Others thought it was too expensive, too risky, too different. History proved them wrong. The iPhone wasn't simply another smartphone. It became a platform for communication, photography, entertainment, business, education, and eventually, millions of mobile applications. Apple hadn't just entered the phone industry, it had transformed it. A year later, Apple introduced another innovation that quietly changed the digital economy: the App Store. Until then, software was often difficult to discover and install. Developers struggled to reach customers. Customers struggled to find reliable applications. The App Store changed both. Suddenly, developers from around the world could build applications and distribute them to millions of users. Customers could download useful apps with just a few taps. It created opportunities for entrepreneurs, small businesses, and independent developers. Apple wasn't just selling phones anymore. It had created an entire digital economy, an ecosystem where hardware, software, services, and developers all supported one another. That ecosystem became one of Apple's greatest competitive advantages. In 2011, the world received heartbreaking news. Steve Jobs had passed away after battling illness. For millions of people, it felt like the end of an era. Many questioned whether Apple could survive without its visionary leader. Would innovation slow down? Would the company lose its identity? Would Apple remain Apple without Steve Jobs? Leadership transitioned to Tim Cook. Unlike Jobs, Cook wasn't known for dramatic product launches or charismatic presentations. His strengths were different: operational excellence, supply chain management, long-term strategy. Under Tim Cook's leadership, Apple continued expanding. The company introduced products like the Apple Watch and AirPods. It invested heavily in services including Apple Music, Apple TV Plus, and iCloud. The business became more diversified, more resilient, and more profitable. People often ask, what made Apple so successful? Was it Steve Jobs? Great marketing? Beautiful products? Powerful technology? The answer is all of those things. But there's something even deeper. Apple never tried to build products for everyone. It focused on building products people genuinely enjoyed using. It cared deeply about design. It simplified complicated technology. It created an ecosystem that connected devices seamlessly. And perhaps most importantly, it stayed willing to reinvent itself. Again and again. Apple's story teaches us that success isn't only about having the best idea. It's about executing that idea consistently, making difficult decisions, learning from mistakes, and having the courage to challenge industries that seem impossible to change. A small garage, 2 friends, a handful of electronic parts. That's where one of history's greatest business stories began. No one could have predicted that this tiny startup would grow into one of the world's most valuable companies. Not because it had unlimited resources, but because it had an extraordinary vision. Apple reminds us that innovation isn't about being first. It's about making people's lives better. It's about solving real problems. It's about refusing to accept. This is how it's always been done. Every great company begins with an idea. But only a few become empires. Not because they never fail, but because they never stop evolving. Thank you for watching Empires. If you enjoyed this documentary, subscribe for more stories about the companies, leaders, and decisions that changed the world. Because next time, we'll uncover another empire, and the incredible journey behind its rise. Until then, stay curious, keep learning, and remember, every empire starts with one bold idea, but it's built through years of relentless execution.